Good morning, Vaughn.
And good morning, Harold.
Another interesting week comes to a close. Why don't we start with revelations at the start of the week of a police investigation into who leaked a document to Conservative MLA Eleanor Sturco?
Yeah, this is a really chilling one, not just for the opposition, but I think for our business as well, because like the opposition, we depend on leaks and we always protect our sources. In this case, the RCMP Major Crimes Division gets a hold of Eleanor Sturco, MLA for Surrey Central and the leading critic in the opposition on policing matters and toxic drug crisis and all that. And they want to know where she got some information that was leaked. So the leak is a big one. Back in February, somebody gave Sturco a Ministry of Health PowerPoint presentation, which confirmed what we had been hearing for a while, which is that the safer supply drugs that the government dispenses to addicts who are registered, that those drugs the addicts were turning around and selling them into the illicit market, and it was happening right away. And it was happening all over BC. The government denied it was happening. They said there was no evidence, and this report confirmed it was real. And within 2 weeks of Sturco releasing that, the government changed direction on this. From now on, safer supply drugs have to be consumed, witnessed. You can't just get the drugs, walk out the door of the pharmacy, which is what was happening, and sell them to people who are waiting on the street to buy them. So it was a big leak. It was a very effective one. And the RCMP wanted to know, where'd you get this from? And Sturco said, well, I didn't get it from the police, if that's what you suspect, but you wouldn't say anything more about that, which is to her credit. But when I heard this, when I think other people heard this, it has a chilling effect. I mean, first of all, as Sturco says, they're trying to intimidate her. And second of all, you're trying to intimidate whistleblowers. Are you going to go and give some confidential information to the media or a member of the opposition if you think the RCMP are going to be on your tail? And where did this come from? And this was the other thing. The Provincial Director of Policing Services, he's in the Ministry of Solicitor General, he's an Assistant Deputy Minister, Glenn Lewis, ordered the RCMP to investigate this. This wasn't, why don't you have a look at it? This was an order under the Police Act. So this whole thing comes out, and as I said, it is a pretty disturbing story about the way the government is dealing with a leak. We can think back to when Sturco first broke this story. The first reaction of the health minister was, how dare she? She has released a confidential document that's appalling, might have compromised the police investigation. It wasn't, this is, okay, you caught us. This was, how did you get the document? So anyway, that's the story as it broke. I guess the second episode in this, Harold, was the reaction. So Solicitor General Gary Begg defended what happened. He said it was appropriate, it was legitimate, it should have happened, there should have been an investigation. He discounted Sturco's concerns. But then we got to the Premier. And I will say this, I thought the Premier's reaction was right on. And David Eby started off a news conference, noon Wednesday. He said, I think the first thing to say is that Eleanor Sturco was doing her job. That's what opposition members do. And Eby said something else. He said, I was in opposition, before we got into government. And he said, if someone had ever given me a document this good, I would have done the same thing that she did, right?
Well,
he
did many times.
And he did. This is effective opposition work, right? So that was the first thing he said. Second thing we asked him was, Sturco thinks this is intended to intimidate the opposition and whistleblowers. And the Premier said, yeah, I can see how you draw that conclusion. He said, I can see how you draw that conclusion. And he said, we have to protect whistleblowers. He said, the NDP brought in legislation to protect whistleblowers. So the third question to the Premier was, basically, can you shut this down? He said, no, actually. He said, I've had that research done in the government, and I can't order the RCMP or the Director of Police Services to stop this. And he said, the Solicitor General can't do it either. They're independent. So I asked a follow-up question. I said, so you don't have the power to stop it, but do you wish they would stop? And he said, it doesn't strike me as a priority. There are better things that the police could do than investigate a member of the opposition over a leak. So pretty strong message there, Harold, from the Premier, former Attorney General, that he wishes they would come to their senses and stop this and devote police resources to something else. So that's where things held at midweek. But yeah, I think it's kind of a lifted the lid on some stuff that's going on in there that is pretty disturbing, both for the opposition and for whistleblowers and for us in our business where we get leaks all the time. I mean, yeah, you're going to protect your sources, but if you're a source, you go, I don't know if I like the idea the police are going to be investigating me over a leak.
So will we ever learn if it's been dropped or if it's continuing?
I think we will be able to ask in the not too distant future. The Premier says that his deputy, the head of the public service, is going to talk directly to the Director of Policing Services who issued this order and ask him what he thought he was doing. The police said the investigation is still open this week, but I sort of think the message from the Premier was pretty clear that you should wrap this up quickly and move on. So we'll see. I think we'll be checking on that to see, but it's a really interesting week, you know.
Absolutely.
Nobody anticipated this coming. Oh, Eby had one funny line. he got asked about this thing that, you know, Sturco says, well, you know, I think this is intended to intimidate. The Premier said, if anybody thinks they can intimidate Eleanor Sturco, they've got another think coming. She should put that on her re-election signs next time, an endorsement from the Premier, because we did have a laugh at that one.
Yeah, that's high praise for sure, coming from him. You told us last week about growing opposition to legislation that would give the Premier and his cabinet the power to fast-track certain projects that they deem worthy or important. Where do things stand on this legislation a week later?
So yeah, we got this two pieces of legislation, a Bill 14 and 15. One gives cabinet override powers on energy projects, and the other one gives cabinet override powers on all kinds of infrastructure, public and private, schools, hospitals, college buildings, but even mines and things like that. So municipal government very upset because it overrides their powers, but the real strong opposition on this has come from Indigenous leaders. And they say that this is the kind of legislation that the government promised, that henceforth the government would consult them in the drafting process of the legislation. So Indigenous rights and title over land and resources would be recognized from the outset, and they say it didn't happen. And the government admits it didn't happen. The government says that now the government this week in the House admitted it was an error. We didn't consult Indigenous people. We didn't think there'd be all that much interest in it. Incredible, but the minister said it in the House. So First Nations leaders asked for another meeting with the Premier, and that meeting was yesterday morning, and they presented their concerns, and they said, we've got the news release they put out ahead of time, they said, fix this legislation or kill it, but don't say, trust us that we'll do better in the future. Afterward, we got a press release from it's a group of Indigenous leaders. It's the major organizations in the province working together that represent Indigenous people. And they said they got nowhere. They said they're deeply disappointed. The Premier indicated to them that he's going to go forward with this legislation. He's proceeding, and basically trust us. The very thing they didn't want to hear. Premier himself put out a news release right afterward, and he said, I told them that we're going to respect Indigenous rights, and there will be no projects approved without Indigenous consultation, and we're going to consult them on the regulations under this legislation. But they're pressing on. Bill 14 cleared a key vote in the legislature yesterday. The House is adjourned next week. It'll be back for the last week of May, but they've indicated, Harold, that they're going to put this through. They've got the votes to do it. They are going to cut debate off on these bills now, let's see, May 28th, which is a Wednesday, and the House adjourns on the 29th. So it's full speed ahead on this. I'm surprised a bit. You know, the NDP has worked so hard at reconciliation with First Nations. I'm surprised that the First Nations got nowhere on this. The government had the option to, the House isn't over for this year. It's coming back in the fall. They could have said, we're going to pause this legislation, not pass it, and we're going to spend the summer doing the consultations we should have done, and we may even amend it in the fall. That would have been a reconciliation approach, but they want these bills, and they don't want any more examples of them backing off under pressure. One bill this session already, right. Under pressure, under outcry, the government had to remove a whole section of the bill, which had these kind of override powers, and the Premier doesn't want to do it again.
The other thing you wrote about this week was the bargaining situation. We got a lot of public sector employees who have their contracts up this year, but the government is saying they're out of money. So
it's an interesting story because of the way this came out. The main government employees union, BCGEU, put out a bargaining bullet to its members saying the talks are not going well. So there's almost 200 different contracts in government and 400,000 workers. But often you look at this central government union, what they get, that tends to go right across the public sector. So they say their talks are not going well. And they say that the government had a town hall meeting online where government employees could log in and get a briefing from the government itself on the government's perspective. So this isn't bargaining, but it's information. And they said that basically the message from the government was they don't have any money for raises this year. So I logged on to that town hall meeting. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. And that's pretty much what they said. The Deputy Minister of Finance, Douglas Scott, said, look, this government is in a structural deficit, and if we don't deal with it, it's going to go on in perpetuity, and we can't delay dealing with it. So the message there is pretty strong. They're already into a $10 billion deficit. The debt of the province is growing from 100 billion to 160 billion over the next 3 years. The share of government going to pay interest is now greater. It's headed to be, it'll be greater than any ministry in government except health and education. So the message that comes through there is they're out of money. And the interesting thing about that briefing, Harold, is that the Deputy Minister of Finance was more candid in this town hall meeting to government employees about the government's financial predicament than the government itself has ever been. You don't hear the Premier come out and say we've got a structural deficit and we have to deal with it right now or we're in trouble. But that's what he said. And I mean, I think he's telling us the actual picture, but this province is serious financial difficulty. And not so long ago, it wasn't. You know, the number that comes back to me again and again is John Horgan, when he stepped down as Premier in the fall of 2022, so not quite 3 years ago, the financial statements that we have from when he left office is that the BC government was in a $6 billion surplus. It's now in a $10 billion deficit under David Eby, and that didn't take us long to get there. Horgan had actually turned the corner on COVID-19. We had a big deficit under COVID-19. The province's finances recovered. So he left Eby $6 billion in the kitty, and Eby spent that and everything else he could get his hands on, and is now in a $10 billion deficit and a structural deficit that they have to deal with now, or it will go. This is the Deputy Minister of Finance's comment. Or it will go on in perpetuity.
When the government, I mean, you look at these budgets very closely. So in the most recent provincial budget, any sense of how much money the government might have set aside? I know it's not specifically earmarked, but for settlements like this?
Well, that's a good question. They do have a contingency fund, and the contingency fund is $4 billion. And that would begin to pay raises, but all the indications are that they need that money for other things. They need that money for, they're still having trouble with ERs closing around the province in the healthcare system. They still have to pay the wage increases from the past round of bargaining, where the increase was 14% over 3 years. They've got public safety issues. They've got issues with housing and that. So I don't know how much money they actually have there. Plus, remember, the hole is $10 billion deep. So if they used every penny of that contingency fund to give raises, they would still be $6 billion in the hole, and that probably isn't sustainable either.
Big challenges. We can't. I guess we shouldn't leave you without an update on the Massey Tunnel replacement, which you wrote about again this week.
I always feel that when I report on or talk about the Massey Tunnel replacement, I should say a trigger warning to anybody who uses that tunnel every day to get to and from work, because the latest is not good. The news is the government, after they killed the old project in 2017, the New Democrats. They finally, earlier this month, got around to filing an application for an environmental approval certificate for their project, which is a tunnel. So they killed a 10-lane bridge that would have been open by now, and they're going to replace it with a tunnel. But they aren't, not only are they not through environmental approval on this, but they just filed it 10 days ago to get a certificate for environmental approval. So they still say construction will be underway next year. And they still say that the replacement tunnel will be open sometime in 2030, which I'm sure makes people feel like relaxed. But the other thing that happened in the last few days was the transportation minister got asked in the House about the cost. So the government says $4.15 billion. That number dates from September 2021. Transportation Minister Mike Farnworth got asked, is that still the number? And he basically wouldn't confirm that is still the number. He said, we're working on the best price for British Columbians. So I think, Harold, that's their way of saying, get ready. There's going to be a new number, and it is not going to be 4.15 billion. It's going to be more than that. So they did that on the Patello, you may remember. They said, oh no, it's 1.377 billion right up to election day. And then afterward they went, whoops, sorry. It's going to be $260 million more. So I think we're going to hear the same thing on Massey. And I wonder if they're going to be able to stick to their schedule of starting construction next year and getting it open in 2030, when they've been stalling and delaying all this time so far.
Is this one of those projects they could fast track under Bill 15?
They could.
Okay.
They could. Bill 15 is supposedly doesn't include transportation projects, but they did brief the press gallery on this, and they said, oh yeah, if the cabinet wanted to, they could step in and fast track it. But they've been stalling on this for years. I think the last thing they want to do is get that thing built and replaced. So I don't think it'd be a priority. I mean, they could, but I don't think they're going to do that at all.
So we'll be talking about it again in the next election.
Yes. Yeah, trigger warning.
All right.
If you use this tunnel every day to get to and from work, pay no attention to the next news story. You want to set aside the paper and not check out online on this issue.
All right, Vaughn. Well, have a great long weekend, and we'll chat again next week.
Yeah, good. Thanks very much, Harold. We'll talk again.